Thank you. I rise in support of my resolution, House Resolution 1155, reaffirming the commitment of the House of Representatives to the peaceful transfer of power. This is identical to the resolution which passed the Senate last week by unanimous consent. The peaceful transition of power is not only a bedrock principle of America's founding, it is a living ideal that we must exercise and pass down to our children. As the United States of America, the federal government has always had a peaceful transition of power, and it is a collective responsibility of this body to ensure that continues. I doubt anyone here needs to be reminded of that. Everyone in America knows that this is what makes us American. Everyone, that is, except President Trump. Last week, he was asked a simple question: will you commit to making sure there is a peaceful transfer of power after the election? His answer? Well, we're going to have to see what happens. No, we're not going to have to see what happens. Then he was asked again, do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transfer of power? Here was his answer, in part: get rid of the ballots and we'll have a very peaceful, there won't be a transfer, frankly, there will be a continuation. During his remarks, he also made bogus and unsupported claims of election fraud. Just in case people were not listening, he said the same thing the next day. President Trump, like any president, wields enormous power, with federal law enforcement and military at his disposal. It's beyond unsettling to hear him suggest that the only result he'll accept is the one where he wins. That sentiment is one of dictators and despots. Sadly, the world is replete with examples of dictators and despots and their refusal to leave office and the chaos it causes. In late 2016, Gambia's president threatened to refuse to leave office even though he had lost the election. Thousands fled the country fearing violence. Only when other countries' troops massed at the border was he forced to leave office in early 2017. Congo's president refused to leave office in 2016, even though his term had expired. He cracked down on dissent and killed people when they protested the election results. That election finally took place 2 years later. Last year in Bolivia, the president declared himself the winner before the vote counting was even finished. After days of civil unrest and protests, the president was forced to resign. Belarus remains in crisis even now as the longtime president holds on to power through an obviously rigged election. Mass protests have gone on, with many injured, gassed, or killed. In America, however, it is not one person, but we the people. We the people who rule. As this resolution says, the people have the right to change their elected leaders through elections. Fortunately, there's no shortage of leadership in America's past to show us the way. I was born in November 1980, right after Jimmy Carter lost to Ronald Reagan. Born the son of two Republican parents who were excited for the peaceful transfer of power to take place. One of my earliest memories of American politics, though, was when I was 11 years old and President George H.W. Bush lost to President Clinton. My parents were not as excited about the peaceful transfer of power, but I remember as a boy watching the results come in and seeing the statements from outgoing President George H.W. Bush and commentators and anchors saying, this is what makes our country so special. And my own family moving on and accepting the results. In a poignant recognition of this, listen to part of what former President George Herbert Walker Bush wrote to former President Bill Clinton, the man who had defeated him, in a note that he left for him in the Oval Office dated January 20, 1993. And it's just here to my left. You will be our president when you read this note. I wish you well. I wish your family well. Your success now is our country's success. I am rooting hard for you. After the 1824 election was decided, here in this House with Henry Clay throwing his support to John Quincy Adams, thus defeating Andrew Jackson, who had won the popular vote, Jackson was understandably outraged and denounced the result as a corrupt bargain. That type of language sounds familiar. But he accepted the outcome and returned to Tennessee. On the evening of the day he lost the presidency, Jackson encountered the new president-elect at the White House. Jackson was gracious, and the city was filled with reports of his grace. "You have, by your dignity and forbearance under all these outrages, won the people to your love," a friend told Jackson, who would run again in 1828 and win. Historian John Meacham recently wrote in March of this year about President Lincoln. In 1864, the country mired in a civil war, running against George McClellan on the Democratic side. And Lincoln had wrote privately he was ready to accept defeat. The election did not look like it was going to go his way, and even in a civil war, there would be a peaceful transfer of power. This resolution states clearly to every American, not on our watch. Not on our watch are we going to let American greatness vanish and an authoritative state rise. The reason we are the beacon to the world is that here, with our elections, the people decide, not our leaders. We let the people decide. We shouldn't only be horrified by the president's remarks about possibly not having a peaceful transfer of power. We should also be concerned by who he looks up to. Unfortunately, America is ruled by someone who admires dictators. He said as much recently to Bob Woodward in a recording stating, "The tougher and meaner they are, the better I get along with them," referring to dictators like Putin, Erdogan, and Kim. And what do dictators do? They don't let the people decide, and they certainly don't honor any peaceful transition of power. So why is it a problem for Americans to have a leader who admires Putin and often sides with Putin over America? Because we know that Vladimir Putin would love nothing better than to destroy our democracy. In fact, our intelligence community assessed that in 2016, Vladimir Putin had a preference for our president and interfered to help him, and that he is doing the same today. Putin wants America to be weak, second to Russia, just another country with no moral standing in the world. But what makes us strong is our rule of law, our democracy, a country governed by the consent of the people. When that happens, we all do better, and Russia hates that. Why? Because Russians and other oppressed people then will want to look more like America. Just think about it. The idea now that Russia could bring down America without even firing a shot because we have one person who is threatening to upset the fabric of our democracy, we cannot let that happen. Too many have sacrificed too much to make sure it doesn't happen. Days after the election, we will each go back to our districts and honor those who have served our country in honor of Veterans Day. We will be reminded of so many heroes who have died and shed blood just for the principle of a peaceful transition of power. We've lost so many for this concept. Now, I know there are some in this country who think that these heroes who fought for our country are suckers and losers for giving up their lives. But I don't think that. I don't believe my Republican colleagues think that. I know colleagues on both sides hold these folks up to be heroes. And I know each of us wants to go to our hometowns right after Election Day, to those Veteran Day parades, look at our hometown heroes, look them in the eyeballs, and tell them, when our democracy was threatened, we stood up and we spoke out. The way we honor their sacrifice is to fight for this. And when someone suggests that a peaceful transfer of power may not happen, we have to push back in every way we can. So I want to thank all of my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, who over the past few days have reaffirmed the understanding of how in America we handle transitions of power and reject the threats from our current leader that it may not happen. By voting for this resolution, you can go on record as supporting these principles. By its text, it, quote, reaffirms the House's commitment to the orderly and peaceful transfer of power called for in the Constitution of the United States, and intends that there should be no disruption by the President or any person in power to overturn the will of the people of the United States, end quote. Even in this era of bitterly divided partisanship, these are basic philosophical tenets, bedrocks and living principles that should receive unanimous support here in the House. And I urge all members to support my resolution, and I reserve the balance of my time.